Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Bourbon in College podcast. My name's Austin, and today we're reviewing the Herman Marshall Texas Bourbon whiskey. But before we get to that, I wanted to discuss something that's caught my eye recently. So we all know that bourbon it's a whiskey that has to be made in America with a mash bill of at least 51% corn, has to be aged in new oak barrels, and there's different designations for different things. Now, there's kind of a debate, not really, that only real bourbon is made in Kentucky. So today, obviously, we're trying a Texas bourbon whiskey, so I wanted to discuss the differences that I find, at least, between Kentucky bourbon whiskey and non-Kentucky bourbon whiskey. So basically, what I discovered is, well, obviously 90-something% of bourbons that are created are made in Kentucky. So it obviously has the widest variety of bourbons. But today I'm focusing on the big names. Like today I'm comparing with a 1792 small batch, or even like a Knob Creek, different things like that. Maker's Mark are all Kentucky straight bourbon whiskeys, or at least Kentucky bourbon whiskeys. Now, that being said, they have to be made in Kentucky. I find that Kentucky whiskeys, especially your more classic names, all are very traditional. Not necessarily that they taste the same, but they use the same traditional, same different mash bill, same basic, just mainly corn, a little bit of rye or wheat maybe, and then the rest barley. They don't really play around with that much. There's not many people doing finishing in the Kentucky area. In the big names again, there's obviously things like Angel's Envy, Isaac Bowman. Yes. It's when you get out of Kentucky that you really see the fun aspects, you might say. There's, like, for example, this Herman Marshall here. It is a bourbon because it's at least 51% corn. Now, I couldn't find the exact percentage that is corn, but it's only 2 grains. It is majority corn and the rest malted barley, which I personally have never seen in any other whiskey. On the last show, we reviewed some samples that are 100% malted barley, but those were American whiskeys, American single malts. They were not bourbons. Some other examples I can think of are some Colorado whiskeys. Obviously, there's a lot of whiskeys like Tin Cup and Stranahan's that are not bourbons themselves, but even within the bourbon world, they taste completely different than Kentucky bourbons. And again, I'm not saying that Kentucky bourbons all taste the same. They follow a more traditional route when they're making them, so they have sometimes some similar taste, which I think is great. All my favorite bourbons are Kentucky bourbons. So again, I'm not trying to say that Kentucky's should be playing around more or not. I'm just noticing differences and wanted to discuss it. Now, obviously, there are bourbons that are sourced from a big distiller in Indiana called NGP, and a lot of those people are doing fun things with. Now, obviously, you got people like Bullet who are trying to make a traditional bourbon out of the source juice, but also people are taking that bourbon and having fun with it. Like, some people are blending it strange. Like, eventually, I'm gonna review a bourbon that's a blend of bourbons from Indiana and all different states, none of them being Kentucky, and just doing really interesting things with that. There's a lot of freedom that can be had in the legal definition of bourbon. So I just thought it was interesting to compare and contrast your basic Kentucky bourbons with your more, I don't want to say more interesting, but more interesting processes that come from non-Kentucky bourbons. Now, before I move on to the review, I wanted to encourage y'all to comment, talk about, what are some strange bourbons that you see that are not from Kentucky, or if there's any in Kentucky that are doing something very different, I would love to know about them, love to try them out. So please let me know. I want you to continue this discussion, whether it's on my Instagram, comments on here, on my blog, but we'll get all that in the end. So now let's start with the taste. So Herman Marshall Texas Bourbon Whiskey. Just a little information off the bottle. It's 92 proof, 46% ABV. Now I already said its mash bill is majority corn, obviously, but everything else is just malted barley, which is unique to me. Now, the Herman Marshall, the distiller, it's Dallas County's first distillery, and they make quote-unquote handcrafted small batch whiskeys, patiently aged in new white oak barrels in the great state of Texas. Enjoy the whiskey renaissance with good friends and a dram of Herman Marshall. This bottle I have is batch number 17-10. You can find more information on their website at www.hermanmarshall.com. I'm definitely going to be checking that out. Now, looking online, I have not seen this reviewed. I've seen the rye reviewed, but I have not seen this one reviewed itself. I also watched a video of the distillery talking about its process, which I found pretty interesting. It is pretty small. It's I believe, a craft distillery. So without further ado, let's get to the tasting. I'll start with the nose here. Man, this smells like somebody mixed Buffalo Trace with Monkey Shoulder Scotch. You definitely get the bourbon notes, but you definitely get the Scotch notes that I'm assuming that comes from the high barley mash bill. It's interesting. It smells good. It definitely has an oak on the nose, like the classic vanilla. Get a good bit of butterscotch and caramel. It's interesting. It's piqued my interest for sure. Let's see what we have on the taste here. So the theme of a blend of bourbon and scotch continues in the taste. I would say in the taste I'd probably say 2/3 bourbon, 1/3 scotch on the taste. You definitely get the classic oaky vanilla and caramel on the taste, but you also get that scotchy butterscotch from the malted barley. It's definitely unique. It's from, I can't put my nose on what kind of bourbon it tastes like to me. Obviously the scotch aspect of it's completely different, but it reminds me of a bourbon I've had not too long ago. I'm thinking maybe it's like the Russell's Reserve 10-year almost. I don't know. It's definitely interesting. Now, for this bottle, I paid about $32 for it. I couldn't find it. It's where I couldn't find the average price across America. That's what I paid for it. And usually Louisiana prices are pretty close to the national average. Ooh, it is all oak, all bourbon on the finish. Now, since we're doing a show on Kentucky bourbon and non-Kentucky bourbon, I'm going to side by side this with a Kentucky bourbon. Now I'm going to taste the 1792 small batch, which I've already done a review on, so if you want full tasting notes, go check that out. I believe it's episode 1. But I just want to compare and contrast it. Right up on the nose, 1792 is very nutty. Classic vanilla and caramel, but very nutty as compared to the Herman Marshall's scotchy. Now, again, it's the very similar oaky vanilla notes on the nose, but there's no nuttiness in the Herman Marshall and a lot more butterscotch. Now on the taste, yeah, the 1792 is much smoother on the taste, which is weird because it's actually 46.85% alcohol, whereas the Herman Marshall is only 46. It's actually higher ABV. So it's very interesting that it's more smooth. The 1792 is more smooth, although it is, like I said before, 1792 is probably one of my favorite bourbons. It's got the smoothness. It's got the sweet nuttiness that I really love. It's got the oak and vanilla. There's not as many complex layers as the Herman Marshall. Herman Marshall has the scotchy butterscotchness of it, all the classic bourbon notes. It has more layers, which makes sense being a craft distillery, playing around, having to get their name out there. It's different. It does taste a little young, the Herman Marshall, especially after comparing it with the 1792. Now the Herman Marshall, it being at lower mid 30s, $30 range, it's going to be a keep for me. It's interesting enough to keep around, especially at that price point. Now, if it goes anywhere around 40 or above, I'm going to move it down to cocktail or even replace. But at that price point, I think it's worth it. Definitely worth keeping around. It's a good story behind it. Always love supporting smaller craft distilleries when I can. Now, as it compares to 1792, in my opinion, blows it out the water, but that's not really a fair comparison because that's it's a classic bourbon. It has recognition. It's had time. It has all these different things that the Herman Marshall Distillery may or may not have as well. So that's my opinion on that. If you want to know more, go follow me on Instagram at bourbon_in_college. Send me an email at bourbonin2020@yahoo.com. Leave a review if you like this. Give me a 5-star good review. Tell me why you like it. If you didn't, give me an honest review. Tell me what you'd like to see me do. And lastly, go follow on my blog at bourbonincollege.com. I'll see y'all next time. Thanks. Hey y'all, thanks for listening. Go rate and review the show. Give me your feedback. Tell me what you like, what you don't like. Follow me on Instagram at bourbon_in_college or on Twitter at inbourbon, or check out the new Facebook page. You'll give it a like. All of those will keep you updated when new podcasts are up and ready to play. Subscribe to us on your favorite podcast distributor, and check out my blog at bourbonincollege.com. Thanks for listening.